Hello there, welcome to another episode in the Versus series. If you're not familiar with the series, I take a faction from two different science fiction franchises and throw them in the pot together and see who comes out alive, or at least successful. The general ground rules are everything about their technology remains the same. In other words, the speed or capabilities of their FTL the same. If one faction has shields and the other does not, that stays the same. The only difference I will make is that the weapons used by both factions have to be able to at least do some meaningful amount of damage to the other. In other words, if one faction uses railguns and the other uses phasers, they still have to actually be able to harm one another. Otherwise this just doesn't work, and it is all in the name of fun, so let's keep that in mind. Whew. Why am I so out of breath? Standing up is hard. The factions of today's two respective powers are the Magog from Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda and the Orcs from Warhammer 40k. Some of the two factions I think actually might, in terms of numbers and general capabilities, would make a fairly interesting matchup, but let's find out. Also, minor disclaimer here, although I am a huge Warhammer 40k fan, I don't actually play it. And for the purposes of trying to condense what is basically 30 odd years of orc lore into what at most is going to be a 10-minute descriptor about them, yeah, there's going to be a few bits left out, so feel free to put stuff in the comment section below, but whether or not every individual like Gazkul Galthraka is going to be mentioned, no. Probably not, no. So there's going to be bits left out. Forgive me, it's the only way I can really condense that amount of lore into such a small, tidy little space. But with that out of the way, let's get started. Hi there, just to interject into whatever that is that you're watching, hopefully you're enjoying it. This is a very quick, little personal ad for mine and my partner's online store, alternativeworld.co.uk. For the month of October, I have reduced some of the prices of some of the items on the website. We've also just launched a new t-shirt, which is horror themed, of course in keeping with the month of October being Halloween season, Halloween being my Christmas. This is a zombie t-shirt which you will find on the website right now. But if you go on, if you also look, you will find several other items have currently been reduced in price, but that is only for the month of October, with a small reduction on some of the items on the website. So if you're in the market for something new, something a bit different, something unique, because many of these items are designed by my partner and by a third-party artist, and they're unique. They're not going to be found on a different website. If that's something you might find interesting, check the description box below. We can only currently send to the United Kingdom, but hopefully we're planning to expand that to be able to deliver elsewhere in the future. So check it out, find something that you like, and back to whatever you were watching. The first faction we will analyse are the Magog. The Magog are a bipedal humanoid, kind of non-cuddly teddy bear looking species of extragalactic aliens that invade the galaxy. They reproduce via YouTube grape with other species and are incredibly carnivorous. In fact, they are so carnivorous that this species' digestive system is started. The catalyst for it is them actually having to kill their prey. In other words, they can't come across some carrion and simply eat it. They've got to physically kill it, which says to me there's a psychological component somewhere, but the Magog are known to be particularly vicious. They are very strong, fairly durable, and have very good hearing and sight, as you would expect from most predators. They age very quickly from their spawning to maturity, depending on the availability of food. They can become mature in literally hours if there is enough food. There is also a genetic memory component with the Magog that, although it's never explicitly stipulated, it has to be, because they seem to become intelligent fairly fast. In a sense, similar to the Orcs, they're actually genderless, with them each reproducing asexually by infesting other creatures with their genetic material, which then coalesce somewhere in the body into little Magog larvae that hatch and eat their host from the inside out until it's dead and they erupt as little baby Magog, and then they start eating everything in sight until they're mature. Magog physically, one of their defining traits is an ability to spit a sort of neurotoxin at the prey, which has a paralytic side to it. It is actually harmless, it won't do you, it's not corrosive or anything, but it will paralyze you and mean that you can't fight back while they eat you or infest you with their little Magog larvae. For social structure, the Magog are fairly rudimentary. The strong are kind of the ones in charge. They do utilize some technology, but most Magog are considered relatively feral, in that they just randomly attack. And they don't overly utilize any weapons. They prefer close in because they want to eat you. That's actually their goal. They don't conquer or suppress a planet. They simply attack it and move on and kind of farm it. But they will wipe out all life on a planet if it also suits them, but they won't just bombard it from orbit, they will just attack. However, despite the fact they don't like to use weapons in close-in combat, some of them will use projectile weapons. Those are sort of the elites. Some of them will use armor, and there's even been instances of Magog evolving to become even more human-like in appearance, making a very elite group of Magog who take on certain human qualities, such as more bipedal hands, more hands, more like ours, should I say, instead of just being clawed messes that they normally have. So the Magog generally worship a god, something known as the Harbinger of the Abyss. This is a trans-dimensional being that basically fills them with rage and hatred and spurs them on to be even more aggressive. And generally they worship this deity by killing in its name. The more destructive and brutal they are, the more they're honouring their god. Very similar to the Orcs, with Gorka and Morka. But in terms of their actual technological capabilities, they are very impressive. Their most powerful weapon is known as a point singularity cannon. This basically has a black hole as a power source, probably an artificial one. It shaves off a little bit of it and then fires it as a weapon. This can rip through any known shielding or armour and is incredibly deadly, but is generally a very large weapon and very power intensive, so it's not usually carried aboard their ships. Their smaller vessels, which they only seem to have one type of ship, are known as the swarm ship. These vessels are what they sound like. They're small fighter-like ships that swarm vessels filled with Magog, and they have some weapons on them, but they're mostly designed to bypass your defences, attach themselves to the hull, smash through the hull and allow the onboard Magog to board the ship and kill the crew. Or they will land on a planet and attack directly on the ground. But generally these ships, their only purpose is to get the Magog to their food supply, nothing more. They do have some larger vessels, if you can call them vessels. The main system of the Magog is known as the World Ship. This is a star that has been slaved to a Dyson sphere, which the trillions upon trillions of Magog live in. And it moves through space, going from system to system, simply destroying everything. They also have what are known as satellite ships that are basically Magog technology, but not very common. In fact, sometimes they're used by other races as gifts by the Magog. These are moons or asteroids that have been converted into starships. They are very powerful and are usually filled with Magog and swarm ships. So that's basically their technology. They have a very loose government and are just as known for fighting and killing each other, again, just like Orcs are. So basically the strong will always be the ones on top, but they reproduce very quickly. A single human host can produce at least a dozen Magog, maybe more, and that's just a human. And bear in mind, they don't have to infest sentient beings, they can infest anything they damn well please, and it allows them to increase in number very rapidly. Okay, so the Orcs. Orcs, again, are a humanoid species. They are genderless, although they generally give the demeanour and sound of being more masculine. They are technically genderless. They are a very crude... A culture is, let's face it with the Orcs, it's not necessarily the word you want to give them. They live to fight. In fact, the Orcs get bigger the more that they fight. They also get smarter the more that they fight, and the more of them that there are. They're linked together with a low-level psychic field that, despite its reputation, is not capable of simply going, I believe this banana is a gun. It's going to shoot vitamins at you now. That's not, like, yeah, I've got my perfect potassium banana gun. It's just, that's not how it works. What it can do is make a weapon that's kind of functional, more functional. A vehicle they think is going to go fast. They think this is going to explode more because it's yellow, then it will. But it is limited. It also doesn't carry on working if, say, a puny Ooman picks up one of the Magog guns, one of their shooters, and tries to boom it at them, and it won't work. There are many instances, though, of Orc weapons being picked up by others and working perfectly fine. So there is something to their technology. Again, there's a big genetic memory and genetic instinct component amongst the Orcs. And Yeah, their tech's crude, to say the least, but functional. They do use some energy weapons, but actually rely mostly on projectile weapons, which is actually, again, very similar to the Magog. How they reproduce is fairly interesting. Orcs are not actually animals in the strictest sense. They're actually a fungus. They grow literally out of the ground. Orcs are constantly shedding spores. These spores, in a nice sheltered, wet place, or pretty much anywhere really, including in the body of a dead orc, will germinate. They'll grow lots of roots, they'll grow mushrooms on the surface, and they'll start sort of erupting more primitive orc forms like snotlings and gretchens and other things that become the foragers, and they set things up ready for the emergence of the orcs. And the orcs are growing on the ground in big pods. They'll eventually be dug out, or they'll erupt out of the ground, and they're the fighters. Although Gretchen and snotlings are not above picking up a shooter, it's mostly the orcs. There are different types of orcs born to different roles. Most are just your run-of-the-mill fighters, but you have weird boys who are a bit more psychic. You have the tech boys who are technology. You get the picture. And although these have a predication towards one specific facet of society, whether it be medicine or technology, effectively they're all just fighters and are there to kill. And everything that they do is to further that goal. And the mech boys, they'll begin building more and more machines, and bigger machines up to the size of gigantic gargants that are huge titan-like machines that'll just flatten everything in sight. The Warhammer. It's insane. That's why we love it, right? The orcs, culturally, if you can say culturally, are built around the idea that the strongest is the one in charge. And the one that's in charge is usually the biggest, because the biggest is usually the strongest, which also they equate to more intelligence. But as I said, if there's enough of them, if they get enough mass and enough war, they start to get smarter, so their technology becomes more refined, their ships get faster, and they become more aggressive. And they even become more civilized in some ways, in that they begin farming and building more advanced ships, and even learn other languages, and begin to be more diplomatic, although that diplomacy is surrender, puny human, or we'll flatten you. But still, a very impressive race when they get going. Generally, they're divided into different factions. They're not necessarily warring factions, but orcs will fight other orcs in lieu of something else to fight. This is not because orcs necessarily dislike the orcs of another faction. This isn't like how one culture of humans dislikes another culture of humans because of a subtle religious or ethnicity difference and thinks that the other one has to be purged and vice versa, because that's really primitive. No, the orcs are more civilized than that. It's more just a case of, we want to fight someone and there's no one else around. Would you like to fight? Yes, we'd like to fight, and we've got no one else to fight right now. Yes, we will fight you. Okay, great, let's start smashing each other's heads in then. You could think of it more as a fun exercise, because literally the orcs enjoy war. It's like a game of football to them, only with more death. Orcs, though, are actually, on that note, extremely difficult to kill. There are even instances of them being decapitated and living. If you stitch the head back on fast enough, they'll live. You can even stitch the head on another body, and it will live. Orcs are weird. And extremely violent. But they're not above a bit of diplomacy and working as mercenaries to others if they're strong enough to control them. But they will collectively come together to fight a single enemy that's big and powerful and basically offers a good fight. The orcs are going to come together and want to fight that one specific enemy. There is one thing I don't think would actually work in this scenario, though. See, the Octarius war between the orcs and the Tyranids works because both factions can effectively use each other to increase their number. The orcs increase their number because they're orcs, and Tyranids are consuming them and making more of themselves. I think where the Magog are concerned, the Magog will not be able to gestate inside of an orc. At least I don't think, because they're not a true animal, they are effectively mushrooms. I don't think so. And that's what I'm going to go with. Let me know in the comments below if you think I'm wrong. But that's what we're going to go on the side of. And that's pretty much it, really. Both factions, just to cover their FTLs, because I realise I've not done it. The Magog utilise Slipstream, which is basically a sort of similar to the Warp, but it allows a vessel to enter. It's actually got more in common with the Lightspeed, the hyperdrive technology in Star Wars. You can enter and exit at certain roughish points of space, and there are certain routes you can take through the slipstream that take you to a predetermined location. It is, however, extremely fast, being able to traverse galaxies relatively easily and quickly within a matter of days or hours. The Orcs, however, use the warp, and warp is dangerous, just like the Orcs love, but primitive and slow. An Orc vessel entering the warp may take years to reach its destination, if it ever reaches it at all. You can get blown off course, you can get lost in the warp, you can even be displaced in time. So there are issues there, but it's mostly a speed thing. 99% of the time you enter the warp, you get to where you want, at when you want to get there, and you've roughly taken as long as you think you were going to take. However, it is slower, much slower than slipstream. So that's going to be a factor here. So, let's get to it. Who wins in a versus between these great powers? Doesn't matter who starts it this time. These two races are going to meet one another under absolutely any circumstances, and they're going to fight. In all probability, the first encounter of the Magog by the Orc are going to be the sort of feral Magog, the sort of ones not necessarily part of the wider Magog society, but the ones that are sort of out there, just little scouting parties. They're the ones who the Magog and the Orcs are going to first start to fight. And those fights are going to be brutal. Very brutal. My guess would be they'll initially go to the Orcs, however, because although these early skirmishes will be brutal, the Orcs are going to massively outnumber these small number of Magog. But they're going to go looking for these fantastic fighters, because Magog ships are damn hard to destroy. Magog are hard to rip apart, they're strong, they're aggressive, they've got paralytic agents that make the Orcs fighting difficult. So the Orcs, they're going to love fighting the Magog. I mean, they're going to love it. So they're going to want to keep doing it. So they're going to go out and search for them. And the more than they encounter, the more the word will spread about these Magog. And more Orcs will come looking for them to fight them some more. And eventually this will result in an open war, because the Magog are going to respond. Because they've got a real threat, a real enemy, a great civilization they've got to destroy. Because that's the Magog's ultimate goal. They want to destroy what they can't basically farm. So if you're sentient, you have to be destroyed in the name of the Magog god. If you're worth fighting, you need to be fought in the name of Gorka Morka. If you're an Orc. So you got to be cunning, or you got to be cruel, but you got to do it. And the Orcs are going to come, and more Orc factions are going to band together into a gigantic Wa, which is what the Orcs call a sort of alliance of many Orcs fighting a single opponent. Once you get a Wa going as well, the psychic field enrages the Orc even more, makes them more aggressive, more attack, until it disbands, until it's worn itself out. Usually under a Wa as well, the Orc will begin increasing in number very quickly. Every world that they take will just become a breeding ground for more Orc. Billions upon billions of Orcs will be being produced very rapidly, but the Magog are also able to do this. They take a single world and billions upon billions of Magog can be produced by infesting the local animals on the world. Sheep, cattle, whatever, doesn't matter. They'll infest it, increase their number. In fact, on that level, the Magog can reproduce perhaps a little faster than the Orc, because they can reach maturity quicker. And also, Magog, it's more about the availability of hosts, whereas the Orcs, it's availability of like good land for them to grow in, but they do have to grow, and they're a little slower at that. However, Magogs are a little more vulnerable in a hand-to-hand fight, but they do like getting in close. Now, although by this point the Magog have realised they can't infest an Orc, they'll start utilising more ranged weapons, which is something the Orcs aren't too keen on, but you know, they'll fly with that, they'll start doing that, or they'll just take the casualties as they charge at the Magog until they can actually fight them. This is probably the first pitched battle warfare the Magog have ever fought, which will put them at a disadvantage. Magog are normally skirmishers. They like to brutally, viciously rip up a bit of space or world, and then they leave again. They don't really stay around to fight armies. Not like that, anyway. But the Orcs will deny them that option. Any world the Magog attempt to infest or go to, the Orcs will come not to its defence, but purely just to fight the Magog. Like the Octarius War, I think this will become a grueling matchup. Orc vessels are huge and powerful, far more powerful than the little tiny swarm ships of the Magog, but the swarm ships are very manoeuvrable and hard to hit. But to be honest, the Orcs will probably be quite happy for this Magog to penetrate their hulls and board the ship, because then they get to fight them hand to hand, which is what the Orcs really want. In reality, the Orcs will try and board the Magog vessels, do the same thing. The Magog are giving the Orcs exactly what they want, but the Orcs and the Magog have different objectives. The Magog aren't dumb enough to keep fighting an enemy that wants to fight them up close, so they're gonna give up on that, and they're just gonna keep trying to use ranged weapons, install more point singularity weapons, maybe send out a few more satellite ships. But it's going to just become a huge, grinding, brutal war of pure attrition. But both sides will likely be just increasing in number, building more ships and getting more of their people to fight and fight and fight. But I do think, I hate to say this, I think the war is going to start to turn in the Magog's favour. The Orc are not an adaptable people. They fight wars very well, but they fight wars very simplistically. They think on a two-dimensional plane. To make that perspective, they think like an infantry, not like an air force or a navy. They're not looking all around them. They just want to fight you in an open battle, and they'll just keep sending wave after wave after wave of Orcs. It's like massive Orcs will charge at the Magog. Magog slaughter all those Orcs. Orcs come back and go, what do we do now? Attack again. Big wave of Orcs go in. They get slaughtered, they pull back. What do we do now? Let's attack again. They'll just keep going. The problem is every time they retreat, they probably respawn. And more of them grow. And then there's more Orcs. And it just becomes, you've got to kill all the Orcs in order to get rid of them. But they won't actually adapt their tactics, whereas the Magog will. Magog are underhanded and sly. It's not uncommon for them to take on agents from other races, but they're not going to get to do that here because no one's going to get involved in this war on either side. The Imperium's going to stay out of it, the High Guard's going to stay out of it, they're just going to let them fight it out. Because quite frankly, whoever wins this, the two sides are still stuck with the same sort of brutal enemy they had before. So they're not really going to care. And they're just going to let them kill each other. But Magog are more underhanded and more technologically adaptive. Orcs don't adapt technologically, they just build whatever they can. Sometimes they build something quite impressive and very advanced and very high explosive or very fast, very powerful. And other times they build a slingshot and they throw marshmallows at you because they don't have anything else. They'll hit you with a club as much as they'll shoot you. Hell, they'll club you with the gun because they feel like it. Orcs fight because they like to fight. Magog are fighting because they actually want to win. The Orc will want this war to carry on because they're enjoying it. The Magog will constantly be looking for a way to destroy them. It is plausible that both the Harbinger of the Abyss will come in on the Magog side and intervene, possibly directly to try and disrupt the Orc, but on that level, it's possible that the great gods of the Orc, Gorka and Morka, could also be made manifest if the war becomes big enough. They could find a way into reality, breach the warp, and also come in on the side of the Orcs. So the Abyss, I think, might be at a disadvantage there, but I think if we take their gods out of it and leave them in a slugging match for long enough, and this war would likely last for millennia. I don't even think it'll be a decade's war or centuries. I think we're looking at millennia of open, constant warfare, with Magogs absolutely loving it. Trillions of Magog on one side, trillions of Orc on the other. And what I meant before was Orcs really loving it. I mean, maybe there's a few Magog doing as well. But I think by this point you've got trillions upon trillions. I mean, the Orcs actually have quintillions in their number, but I think they'll die in greater numbers once they're going up a pitched battle against the Magog, because the Magog will begin to adapt and just kill the Orc at range. They'll bomb them, burn them, do whatever they have to do to try and decrease the Orcs' number. And I think that's going to be the deciding factor. In an attrition over a period of many thousands of years, the Orcs are going to be broken down, but I don't believe they'll ever be outright defeated. I don't even think there'll ever be a peace. I just think the Orc and the Magog will continue to fight until the Magog are so big and overpowering of the Orc. The Orc are no longer a major threat, and the major war dims down, but the Magog have increased in number and built so many ships and have so many of themselves and have built such weapons designed specifically to fight the Orcs that the Orcs aren't actually much of a threat to the Magog anymore. The Magog are already able to run rings around the Orc because their FDL capability is far more sophisticated, so they can keep them at bay, keep them off balance, destroy their supply lines, hit and run raids on smaller outposts, keep the Orcs such as they are off balance, if you can even consider the Orcs ever really balanced. But I think that's where this war is going to go. I think it's going to result in a Magog victory of sorts, but I don't think the Orc will be defeated. I don't even think their numbers will be particularly affected. I still think they'll still be outnumbering the Magog. I still think there'll be quintillions of them and trillions of Magog, but the Magog are going to come out on top because they're going to be the ones who adapt and develop defenses against the Orc and basically manage to keep them at bay. Not necessarily a stalemate, I would lean on this being a Magog victory, but it'd be a hard one to win. It'd be a hard fought war, and it'd never truly end, because the objectives of both powers would forever be at odds. But that is my conclusion. You don't have to agree with it. Tell me in the comment section below who you think would win. I don't think, as I said, this will be an out-and-out victory. I think that the Magog would take horrendous casualties in the early stages of the war despite their superior FTL capabilities. I think that the Orcs would do a lot of damage, but thanks to their point singularity weapons and adaptability versus that of the Orc, the Magog would recover in number and eventually build battle lines against the Orc that would be able to keep them at least at bay while the Magog did their thing. But as I said, they'd be forever at odds. But again, that's just my opinion. You're free to disagree with it. Let me know in the comment section below if you do think that the sheer weight of biomass of the Orc would simply have overwhelmed the Magog in the early stages to the point where the Magog would not have been able to recover and actually win the war. Let me know in the comment section below. And that is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Like, share and subscribe, and bye bye.